Hey everyone, Equinoct here, and welcome back to Higurashi When They Cry, Chapter 1, Onikakushi. In the last episode, Rena's starting to lose it a little bit, and where we left off, apparently she was creeping around in Keiichi's house while he was talking to the cops, which is always a good sign. So we will see where it goes from here. Weariness and a headache. Not a very nice way to start the day.
どうしたの？ケイチ、今朝は顔色悪いわよ。昨べは何時に寝たの？
It seemed that my mom had noticed my sullen state. Yesterday, I kept waking up in the middle of the night. Without a doubt, I felt the presence. I felt the presence of someone standing in front of my door. I told myself repeatedly that it was my imagination and forced myself to try and sleep. Except, not being able to stand it, I gathered up my courage and opened the door. Of course, there wasn't anyone there. I think I did this 3 times throughout the night. Or maybe I just didn't remember doing any more than that. Even though I was able to get to the breakfast table without incident, I still didn't feel at ease.
風邪かもしれない。なんだか食欲ないんだ。
あら、ちょっと熱あるんじゃない？どうする？学校行ける？
Technically, I did go to a school, but it was mostly self-study. It wouldn't matter much if I missed a day, would it? It could have been that I hadn't been feeling well for the last few days because I really did have a cold. If I took some medicine and got a good day of rest, I might be able to greet everyone with a smile tomorrow. Ding dong! Startled, I looked back and forth between the entrance and the clock. It was 10 minutes later than when I usually meet up with Rena. It was Rena.
レナちゃん迎えに来ちゃったけど、どうする？お休みする？
Rena was a good girl. She might be somewhat quirky, but she was certainly cute. The lunches she made were delicious, and she always looked out for me. Why should I be so scared of someone, or something like that? No, someone. It wasn't Rena's fault. It was probably mine. It had to have been my cold. It just had to be.
休む。ごめん。
じゃあ、母さんが断ってきてあげるわね。
Mom headed off to the door. I would have to pass by the entrance to get back to my room. I didn't have the nerve to meet with Rena, so I wrapped myself in a blanket on the sofa and closed my eyes. I was so sleep deprived, I quickly fell into a deep slumber. I had only intended to lie down for a bit, but it was almost noon when I woke up. I called out to my parents, but they didn't seem to be around. On the table, I found lunch prepared and a note. Mom and Dad had apparently driven off to somewhere far away. It likely had to do with Dad's work. This happened every so often, so it wasn't that unusual. They would be back for dinner, but might be a bit late. On the note it said, "The insurance card is in the cabinet. Take it and go to the hospital." There was also a well-drawn map to the hospital. That's right. I hadn't been there before, so I didn't know exactly where it was. I had a light lunch, although it really was just leftovers from the morning, and just in case, went to the hospital. Normally, I'd never be here in the middle of a weekday. Just walking around like this had me feeling guilty. It was an odd feeling. Are you kidding? Like walking around outside during the day when you're supposed to be at school? For me, whenever I was a kid and I got to miss days of school, either because I was sick or had personal business going along with family, like that was an awesome feeling. Like, wow, this is so unnatural for me. But maybe that's just me. Following my mom's map, I took a road I usually never used. After walking for a bit, the hospital sign came into view. Irie Clinic was written rather stylishly on the sign. The clinic wasn't very big, but based on the scale of the rest of Hinamizawa, it was far too grand. There was a parking lot and even a reserved spot for buses. They must be making a mint. I spaced out in the air-conditioned waiting room until it was my turn to be seen.
前原さん、診察室へどうぞ。
After half-heartedly answering all of the chatty doctor's questions, he responded with the old, "It's probably a cold." They gave me a shot and 3 days worth of medicine. I thought it was a little overboard, but if it would clear away the gloomy feeling I'd been having lately, then it was worth it. I settled the bill and took a quick trip to the washroom. As I was leaving, I overheard a conversation between some elderly people who seemed to be regulars at the clinic. Of course, I had no intention of eavesdropping. If it just wasn't for that word.
やっぱり鬼隠しかいね。
どうかね。まだまだ若い子だけゃ。駆け落ちかもしられへん。どこの誰とよ。季節のたびに東京もんが来ちょったろ。でっけえカメラ持った若者が。あれと仲が良きゃったって話知られへんの？
Were they talking about Tomitake-san? I could feel my ears perking up.
そら知らんけど。でも普通駆け落ちっても仁義あるだろう。書き置きとか辞表とか書かんかいね。
すったらんかかんから駆け落ち言うんね。わきゃ看護師さんの顔見られんようなるわ。寂しいね。
高野さんはしっかり者よ。どこへ行ってもやっていけろん。
So her name was Takano-san. That woman with Tomitake-san. And she worked at this clinic? Oyashiro-sama's shadow was following me everywhere I went. I started listening more closely, but they began talking about fishing, and it didn't seem like they were going to revisit the topic. I gave up and left. Thus, even though I was separated from the daily monotony of school, I wasn't able to escape from Oyashiro-sama's shadow. But of course, Oyashiro-sama was the guardian deity of this place, of Hinamizawa. As long as I was in Hinamizawa, I wouldn't be able to escape. I just noticed on the pathway in this picture, it looks like a tiny little smiley face. Looks like something from Adventure Time. It's cute. Okay, back to the story. Maybe it was because I was walking outside, but my appetite had suddenly returned. I might as well buy a snack with the change from the examination fee on the way home. Contemplating that, I turned onto a familiar street, the tiny little smiley face street. At that moment, I heard a car horn abruptly honk behind me. Was I really walking so far into the middle of the road where I'd be in a car's way? I moved further off to the side, but the horn was still honking at me. I turned around, peeved.
前原さん、こんにちは。
It was Oishi-san. He stepped out of his car, AC on full blast, and waved at me.
今日はどうしたんです？学校はお休みですか？
ちょっと体調悪かったんで今日は休みました。お昼を買って帰ろうとしてたところです。
そりゃよかった。実は私、お昼に行こうとしてたんですよ。よかったらご一緒にいかがです？ああ、お体に触るようでしたら構いませんよ。
I was just going to lie down after going home anyway. And I didn't really have a cold.
地元の食堂だと嫌でしょう。町まで行きましょう。ちょっと走りますがよろしいですかな？私、おいしいお店知ってるんですよ。
I'd finally begun to understand Oishi-san's roundabout way of saying things. He probably wanted to talk to me about stuff that would be difficult to discuss while in Hinamizawa. I went with Oishi-san, riding in his frigid car. It was almost as if the bright sunlight outside was a lie.
昨夜は遅くまですみませんでしたね。ご家族に送られませんでしたか？
いえ。
I recalled Rena, who had been listening to the phone conversation all that time, separated from me by just the door. Even now, in the brightness of the sunlight, the thought still creeped me out. With the big bump that jolted the car, the road connecting to the city changed from dirt to pavement. My head swiveled back with a sudden realization. That's right. This was where Tomitake-san died.
富武さんの捜査は暗礁に乗り上げています。
Oishi-san spoke while peering at me from the corner of his eye.
自分の爪で喉をかき破るという異常さから幻覚作用のある何らかの薬物によるものだと信じているのですが、こういう症状、それも急激に引き起こす薬物はなかなかないらしいんです。もちろん検視解剖もそれを念頭に置いて十分に行ったのですが、手がかりはやはりありませんでした。
漫画なんかによくあるじゃないですか。体内に取り込まれると分解したりして証拠が何も残らないなんて、そんな薬
ありますよ。演歌作詞何でしたっけ？まあ、結構あります。でもですね、富武さんのような症状を引き起こす薬物にはそういうものはないそうなんですよ。
じゃあ警察は 富武さんはたたりで死んだってそう言うんですか？
I couldn't help but feel that the police were worthless. I just wanted the idea of a curse to be disassociated from Tomitake-san's mysterious death.
悔しいですが今のところは。ですが死因はともかく死ぬ前に何人かの人間に囲まれて暴行を受けたことだけは間違いありません。たたりでなく人間が事件に関わっているのは疑いようがありませんよ。
That made me a bit relieved. We passed in front of the rather desolate, but still busier than Hinamizawa train station. The car pulled into a restaurant parking lot, and I followed Oishi-san into the shop. It was pretty crowded, but there were only adults at this hour. Of course, there wouldn't be any children in here in the middle of a weekday.
2名です。タバコは、我慢します。
こちらへどうぞ。ご注文がお決まりになりましたらお呼びください。
We were led by a peculiarly dressed waitress on our table. I sat with Oishi-san in the booth.
どうです？このお店のウェイトレスさんの格好、可愛らしいと思いません？
まあどうでしょうね。
このお店ね、いつも大人気なんですよ。お料理よりもウェイトレスさんがね。
Okay, Oishi-san.
ああ、大石さん、目がやらしいですよ。
I guess Keiichi found someone who's just as pervy as he is.
そうですか
Those ice creams look good. Regardless of how the waitress looked, the food was decent enough. Finishing our meals while talking about some insane topic, Oishi-san's after-meal cup of coffee arrived at the table.
昨日、ひなみ沢の昔話が出ましたよね。
ええ、人食い鬼の里だって言われてたって話でしたっけ？
私もあんまり詳しい方じゃないので、うちのおばあ様に今朝ちょっと聞いてみたんです。
Oishi-san took out the notepad that was stuffed into his breast pocket.
なんでもですね、大昔はひなみ沢は鬼ヶ淵って呼ばれてたんだそうです。
鬼ヶ淵、すごい名前ですね。
今でもその名前残ってるんですよ。神主の妻が受水自殺した沼の名前は今でも鬼ヶ淵というんです。沼の底の底は鬼たちの住む国とつながってると言われてたんだそうです。
Of course, nobody had told me anything about such an ominous swamp.
でですね、鬼ヶ淵は恐れられていたと同時に崇められてもいたんだそうです。
A respect born of fear. I guess you could say it was a kind of defecation. A village of inhuman creatures.
鬼たちはある種の仙人でもあったらしいんですよ。例えば不治の病にかかった村人を鬼ヶ淵に運んで治してもらったりとかしたんだそうです。
Even if we are calling them demons, Tengu, long-nosed goblins, or Sinin would be more apt description.
鬼って言ってもそんなに悪い人たちじゃないみたいですね。
でもそこはやっぱり人食い鬼らしいんです。ばあ様に聞いた昔話ではですね、息子を治療してもらった代償として連れてきた母親を食わせろとこうなるらしいんですよ。
息子を治療してもらった対価が自分ですか？それは怖いな。
もちろん母親は息子を連れて逃げます。これをですね、鬼ヶ淵に住む村人鬼たちがですね、全員で追いかけて取り囲んで捕まえたんだそうです。
The entire village, apparently. That's quite a frightening thing to imagine.
結局母親も息子も捕まって食べられちゃったんだそうです。おしまい。
その話矛盾がありますよ。当事者の2人が食べられちゃったんですから、その話が残るはずがありません。
ありゃ。昔話はこういうの多いですよね。
In contrast to the ghastly tale, Oishi-san laughed heartily while sipping his coffee.
でもですね、他の昔話にも結構あるらしいんですよ。鬼ヶ淵の鬼たちが総出で獲物を捕まえに来るというのは。
I recalled that Mion said all of the villagers united and fought against the dam construction. I saw similarities with how that part about unification overlapped.
鬼たちの獲物は常に一人で、しかも前もって決められているらしいんです。
That caught my attention. Oishi-san also appeared to be pondering what it meant.
ばあ様が言うにはですね、鬼の狩りの時には絶対に邪魔をしてはいけない。家に閉じこもって布団をかぶってろって言うんです。
つまりどういうことですか？
獲物の人を助けたりかくまったりしてはいけないんだそうです。鬼の狩りを邪魔しない限り村人には危害を加えない、そういうルールなんだそうです。
Basically, don't help the victims. Pretend you didn't see the atrocities, in other words.
ルールを破ったらどうなるんです？
さあ、何しろ人食い鬼ですからね。
Many parts of that tale caught my attention. Parts of the story he told me overlapped with his theory that the entire village was in on the crime. Even if it wasn't the whole village, it was conceivable that the villagers were hiding under the covers and leaving them to die when there's a group that was on their hunt, wasn't it? I didn't dare to speak.
じゃあ大石さんはやっぱり村ぐるみもしくは村人数人の犯行だと見てるんですね。
前原さんはどう思います？ああ、すみません。コーヒーのおかわりいいですか？
That's what I wanted to know. It seemed that We were both waiting for the other to say the last part. He waited for the waitress to finish pouring coffee before speaking.
去年サトシ君が失踪した頃から私は不審に感じていたんです。
Oishi-san muttered as he watched the milk swirl around in his coffee.
それでサトシさんのお友達、つまり前原さんのお友達グループの皆さんをちょっぴりだけ、本当にちょっぴりだけですよ、調べさせてもらったんです。
If Oishi-san had said this to me before, I would have gotten angry at him for calling my friends into question. But as I was now, I couldn't.
とてもつまらない話になります。前原さんがつまらないと感じたらいつでもおっしゃってください。終わりにしますので。
Oishi-san was wearing the most serious expression that I'd ever seen from him. It was as if he was telling me to prepare myself and listen. There were quite a few things I regretted hearing from Oishi-san, but none of them were as threatening as this. A little voice inside me was screaming like an alarm. Stop, Keiichi. This was probably the last one. I took a deep breath and silenced that voice. I would not run from the truth.
お願いします。
That was all I could utter. Oishi-san stared into my eyes silently for a few moments. After he was certain I was ready, he began.
1年目の事件の被害者は現場の監督さんだったんですが、事件の数週間前に園崎美音さんと取っ組み合いをしてるんですよ。何度か。
Oishi-san had said before that Mion had defied the damn project vehemently. Well, it wasn't hard to imagine how she'd be if she got worked up.
2年目の事件で誘致派の夫婦が事故に遭いましたよね。現場にはお嬢さんが一緒にいたんです。それが北条聡子さんなんです。
え？聡子って聡子？
Oishi-san's look told me that my voice was too loud. I realized it as well and quickly quieted down.
3年目には神主夫婦が亡くなられますよね。そのお嬢さんが古出里香さんです。
リカちゃんが
4年目に亡くなった主婦はもうわかりますね。北条聡子さんの義理のおばです。当時は聡子さんはご両親を事故で失っていましたので預けられていたのです。被害者宅に。
I could tell my lips were getting dry. I didn't even have the wits to keep my mouth from hanging agape. I had thought it was nothing but bizarre incident, one that I could easily distance myself from. But clicking and clacking, it had snuck all the way around to my feet.
ちなみに4年目に失踪した北条聡さんは聡子さんの実の兄になります。
ちょっと待ってください。
It took everything I had to finally say that. I gulped down a glass of water and once again wiped my face with a napkin. Calm down, Keiichi Mayabara. But Oishi-san was relentless. Instead of waiting for me to finish sorting out my feelings, he started speaking again. The last of the things I shouldn't have heard.
犯者たちはなぜかあなたのお友達グループに全てつながるのです。
Oh, okay. So to recap, the guy who worked at the dam construction who was dismembered got into a few fights with Mion. The couple who fell to their deaths from a cliff were Sadako's parents. The Shinto priest who died and his wife, who apparently committed suicide, are Rika's parents. The housewife who was beaten to death was Sadako's aunt, and her brother was Satoshi, who went missing. That's... wow. Yeah, like, that would be a lot for anyone to take in. Like, every string of mysterious deaths were related to their own personal group of friends. It's, very unsettling.
偶然に決まってるじゃないですか。
前原さん、静かに静かに。みんな見てますよ。
Mion? Satoko? Rika-chan? So what if they're connected? You're telling me all of my friends? It couldn't be. It just couldn't be. Oh, Rena is different, isn't she? Rena isn't connected with the victims at all.
リュウグウレナさんは去年まで茨城の郊外にお住まいでした。まあ確かにいずれの被害者とも直接の面識はありませんが。
He said it in a roundabout way. Is he saying she's also connected?
実は調べてみたら、リュウグウさんは引っ越しの少し前に学校で謹慎処分を受けているんですよ。なんでも学校中のガラスを割って回ったんだとか。
レナが学校中のガラスを割った？
That same spacey Rena had? I couldn't even imagine it.
3日間の謹慎が明けた後も復学しなかったようです。
She was only suspended for 3 days for smashing all the windows at her school? Okay, I don't know how the school systems in Japan are, especially in the 1980s, but yeah, that shit won't fly in schools in America, I can tell you that.
その間に神経科に通院し、何週間かの間、投薬と医師によるカウンセリングを受けています。
I wonder if it was something like a nervous breakdown. I'd heard that it happens to people who are really methodical or overly sensitive. Neither of those matched Rena's easygoing personality.
でですね、そのカウンセリングをした医師のカルテに、レナさんの会話内容が記載されているんですがね、その中に出てくるんですよ。結構。
何がです？
I pressed forward carelessly. There couldn't be anything more for me to regret.
出てくるんですよ。お社様って単語が。
Okay. So, Rena, who was going to school outside of Hinamizawa, is mentioning Oyashiro. It felt like someone's stone-cold hand was caressing my back. Why? Why had Rena spoken of Oyashiro-sama before she even came to Hinamizawa?
お社様っていう幽霊みたいなものがですね、夜な夜な自宅にやってくるっていうんですよ。枕元に立って自分を見下ろすんだって。
My mind froze. I couldn't process what I was being told.
その後、しばらくしてひなみ沢に引っ越されたんです。ああ、そうそう。レナさんはよそ者なんかじゃないですよ。
え？
住民票で分かったんですが、竜宮一家は元はひなみ沢の住人です。レナさんがちょうど小学校に上がるときに茨城へ引っ越されたんです。
My mind went completely blank. It was similar to the static you'd see on a blank TV channel. My ears began ringing as I lost all sense of comprehension.
前原さん、大丈夫ですか？もう終わりにしましょうか。
Those words brought me back. I couldn't let it end here.
レナのことは分かりました。じゃあその最後の被害者の富武さんはどうなんですか？誰と接点があるんですか？
Irritated, I let out one final reprisal.
全員ですよ。お忘れですか、前原さん。みんなで楽しくお祭りの晩を過ごしたじゃないですか。何人もの警官が皆さんの楽しそうな様子を見ていますよ。
Now there was nothing I could respond with. I fell silent as my brain turned to mush.
そろそろ出ましょう。ああ、前原さん。お昼の薬は飲みましたか？
I had completely forgotten about the medicine I had gotten today until Oishi-san said that. I got another glass of water, and we left the shop after I chugged it down. We got in the car and returned to Hinamizawa via the rough road. I never really paid attention when I was on my bike, but did cars normally shake this much? It was almost as if the road was desperately trying to tell me something. But dump. That big jolt was from the difference in elevation on the road when it changed from cement to dirt. Roads do that. I was certain that I heard Tomitake-san scream. I sat in silence, just letting myself be shaken by the car.
お家の前まで送りましょう。今日は病気でお休みだったんですよね。長々とお話ししてしまって申し訳ありませんでした。
なんで俺に話すんですか？
I blurted out the question. Really, just blurted out. I didn't expect an answer.
私、一応確認しましたよね。お話やめましょうかって。
じゃなくて、どうして俺に接触してきたんですか？
I understood quite well that Oishi-san was investigating the string of suspicious incidents. But why was he telling me all this? I knew nothing and couldn't help. Everything Oishi-san spoke of was news to me. First of all, what could I, having just moved here, possibly know? By chance, if there was a reason for Oishi-san to reach out to me, then it would have to be that I was part of Mion's circle of friends who looked suspicious to Oishi-san.
私ね、今年で定年なんです。定年したらばあ様の意向で引っ越しちゃう予定なんですよ。だからこそ在職中にこの事件だけははっきりさせておきたかったんです。
で、大石さんは疑ってるんですよね。みんなを。
Oishi-san didn't really give a response. It felt a little late, but I thought it was his way of showing a bit of consideration for my feelings.
これはこの道30年の勘です。前原さん、 危ないのはあなたなんですよ。
I wanted to reply with, "That's absurd," but in my downtrodden state, I couldn't bring myself to say it.
私は今年で定年ですから、来年の綿流しの日にはもういません。だから今年中に決着をつけたいのです。
In other words, he was insinuating that on the next Watanagashi, I might be the victim.
所長からも注意を受けています。一連の事件は個々に解決しているから蒸し返すなというんです。これは一種の圧力です。
圧力って何のですか？
ひなみ沢の誰かです。着きました。この辺でいいですか
？After some time, the car finally reached the path to my house. The clock read 2 p.m. I was surprised so little time had passed since we ate. It was hot outside the car. The chirping of the Higurashi hurt my ears.
今日の話は全て忘れてくださっても結構です。ですが、私は捜査を続けますよ。お社様のたたりは今年で終わらせます。
何かあったら連絡しろってことですか？
いいんですよ。前原さんがどうしても連絡したくなった時だけでいいんです。
I wasn't collected enough to understand Oishi-san's roundabout way of saying it.
ゆっくり休んでください。病気でお休みの時によくない話ばかりして申し訳ありませんでしたね。
I didn't really give any sort of response.
私はいつでもあなたの味方です。それだけは信じといてくださいよ。それじゃあ失礼。
The tires crunched over the dirt road as the car made a U-turn and disappeared into a cloud of kicked-up dust. It felt like I was watching a boat only throw me a lifesaver in shark-infested waters before disappearing into the distance. That was the first time I thought Oishi-san was being unfair. Telling me I was going to be the next victim, then just saying to contact him if something happened. This wasn't a criminal investigation. He was fishing. And I was just bait dangling off the line. Would the fish be the perpetrator? Or was it really just Oyashiro-sama's curse? Either way, the bait would be swallowed whole.
畜生、俺死にたくないよ。
For some reason, I could do nothing but stare at the puddle of water left behind by the AC from the car. Pretty informative. I wonder how much time had passed since I laid down. It was getting dark outside. My body was soaked in sweat. It would probably be a good idea to change my sheets. At that moment, the phone downstairs rang. It was probably Mion. It was probably Mom. Mom was quite the worrywart. Maybe she had called many times, but I just didn't notice it.
もしもし、前原ですけど。
お、生きてた。もしもーし。ミオンだけど。具合はどう？
ケイイチのお友達ですか？ 圭一は休んでますけど、代わりましょうか。
お父様で。すみません。
Well, it's nice you can still kid around with them.
バカで引っかかってやがるよ。
Excuse me. After our exchange, we both had a good laugh together. Except, I was suspicious of her even as we were laughing. Was everybody really involved in the incidents? The fact that I couldn't say no saddened me.
元気そうで安心したよ。レナもすっごく心配してたよ。サトコはざまあないですわって喜んでたな。リカちゃんは病気でかわいそうかわいそうですってさ。
チェ、みんなで勝手に大盛り上がりしてたみたいだな。
まあまあ。でさ、ケイちゃん、お見舞いに行っては都合悪いかな。
お見舞い？いいよ、そんな重病人ってわけじゃないんだから。う
ちのバッチャが山ほどおはぎを作ってさ、お裾分けに持ってけって言ってんだよ。だから持ってくね。
おいおい、風が移っても知らねえぞ。
おじさんもレナもおバカさんだから大丈夫。じゃあね、すぐ行くから。
She hung up cheerfully. Rena's coming too? That's what it sounded like. I was still concerned about meeting Rena, but I guess if she was with Mion. I heard the doorbell 10 minutes later.
どんな感じ？ちゃんと薬飲んで寝てた？
そりゃもうしっかりとな。
元気そうでよかった。心配してたんだよ。
悪かったな。明日にはもう大丈夫だよ。
Mion showed a complete lack of concern for someone who's recovering, and Rena looked like she was worried about me from the bottom of her heart. It didn't look like there was anything behind those expressions.
ちょっとお邪魔しようかと思ったけど、まだ本調子じゃないみたいだね。
そうか？
It seemed my face appeared a bit sullen.
じゃあこれ、ケイチくん。みーちゃんのおばあちゃんが作ってくれたおはぎだよ。
Rena held out a package wrapped in newspaper. There might be about 5 in here. It was quite hefty.
あ、サンキューな。ミオンのばあちゃんによろしく伝えといてくれよ。
その中にね、レナが作ったのも混じってるんだよ。ケイチくんに見つけられるかな。
これ、今日の部活を欠席したケイちゃんへの宿題ね。おはぎにアルファベットがついてるから、明日回答すること。
お見舞いなのか部活なのか、どっちかにしろ。
元気元気。これなら明日は大丈夫そうだね。
この騒ぎで熱がぶり返したらどうしてくれんだよ、まったく。
みーちゃん、あんまり騒いじゃ悪いよ。もう行こう。お家の人にも怒られるよ。
Both of them thought my parents were home. It was because the entranceway was a mess.
そうだね。も もう行こっかね。あ、そうそう、ケイちゃん。
なんだよ。
お昼
Oh,
何食べた？
oh my. The sudden question startled me, and I went wide-eyed when I saw Mion. I'd never seen her like that. It was a highly unsettling visage. But why is she asking me about what I ate for lunch? What she said was so insane, it was almost meaningless. The way she said it, it was almost like she didn't even care at all about what I ate.
表で食べたよ。
She must have suspected that I was with Oishi-san. Anyway, I felt that if I hesitated or tried to change the subject, then they'd read too deep into it, so I tried answering as quickly as possible. Except, contrary to the efforts I had made, there was a pause before they replied.
ケイチくん、お昼は外食だったんだね。
The glimmer from Rena's eyes had changed at some point as well. It was now sharp, as if to make me feel the feigned ignorance behind her words even more. As if she already knew. That's how it looked to me.
どう？美味しかった？
なんでそんなことを聞くんだよ。
Mion was speaking in an unusually low tone. Almost as if she knew that I had eaten at the restaurant in town. No, I'm overthinking this. I mean, both of them should have been in school at lunchtime. There was no way they could have known where I was.
渋いおじさまとご一緒だったみたいだけど。誰？
Flop. The package with the mochi I was holding slipped out of my hands. I could tell the blood had drained from my face, making me go pale.
へえ。ケイチくん、それ誰？ひょっとしてこの間の人かな
I could feel the back of my throat going dry. This was no longer a bluff. They knew everything.
なんでそんなことわかるんだよ。
It took everything I had to finally force those words from my throat. My knees were shaking.
さーてね。おじさんにわからないことはないからね。
Mion sneered knowingly, and her laugh seemed to carry on forever.
で、ケイちゃん、何のお話をしてたの？ずいぶんと熱くなってたみたいだけど。
みんなの話はしてないよ。
ふん。聞いてもないのにレナたちの名前が出るなんてなんだか怪しいな。
Rena's unwavering gaze pierced through my eyes and peered further inside me. I dug my own grave. My heart was throbbing so much, it felt like it was going to explode.
ま、何を隠れてやろうとも、おじさんにはすべてお見通しってこと。それだけを忘れないでくれればいいかな。
I couldn't even shake my head. It took everything I had to stop my teeth from chattering. She never let her gaze break from mine, even as she tilted her head slightly.
ケイチ君、顔色悪いよ。もう横になった方がいいと思うな。
そうだね。私たちはもう帰ろう。
As if nothing had happened, they both giggled at each other and started making their way out. I hadn't moved a muscle since I had dropped the package of mochi. As they left, the door slowly closed behind them. All I could do was stare. As if I couldn't move until the door was completely closed. Just as the door was about to close, it opened again slightly with a sudden creak, sending my heart racing once again. A single eye peered in through that narrow slit, and Mion's hawkish gaze peered at me once again.
じゃあね、ケイちゃん。
ああ。
明日学校休んじゃ嫌だよ。
Thud. The door closed. I wasn't able to move a muscle even after their low laughter died off into the distance, and silence once again enveloped the room. Coming back to my senses, the first thing I did was lock the door. They knew what Oishi-san and I had talked about. Why? How? No, that wasn't important. Thinking about it now, all of it could have been overheard from the beginning when Oishi-san met me. Just as Mion said, I couldn't hide anything. Then, what were they trying to tell me? That part was obvious. They were warning me not to say anything unnecessary. What did they deem unnecessary? I only talked with Oishi-san about one thing, and they were warning me that that was unnecessary. What was it that Oishi-san talked to me about? The incidents involving Oyashiro-sama's curse that occurred every year weren't individual cases, but were connected as a whole. As well as the fact that there may be multiple perpetrators hidden within Hinamizawa. No, more precisely, that Mion, Rena, Satoko, and Rika-chan were all suspicious. Is that what they were warning me against?
何バカなこと考えてんだよ、俺。
I hit my own face hard enough that it let out a loud slap. If only that would wake me up from this nightmare, but for some reason, it felt like I was punching a blanket. It was almost laughably painless. Calm down, Keiichi Mayabara. When did I become such a pessimist? Calm down, calm down. Settle down and sort things out. The reason Mion knew I was eating lunch with Oishi-san was probably because somebody from Hinamizawa just happened to be there at that time. They must have told Mion that I was there. That made the most sense. Plus, come to think of it, she didn't ask me where I ate lunch, did she? She only asked, was it good? They were just curious since I was together with someone not from Hinamizawa. It's not as if they had any ulterior motives. That's it. That has to be it. Thinking about it that way, it was the same with Rena. I was just being strangely ambiguous about when I met with Oishi-san and Rena was just correcting me on that. That's when I was bewildered by the change in character from the usual mild-mannered Rena, and was just startled by it. That's the most natural way of thinking about it. It felt like my mind was mixed up like a tangled mess of spaghetti. Deep red marinara sauce would have poured out of my nose and ears if he squeezed my head. Graphic. Thinking that, I suddenly felt like vomiting. I really didn't want that to happen, so I stopped holding my head. Lately, I had no idea what anyone was saying. Spending time with them was fun. It didn't feel like there was any sort of hidden agenda. I really do think that they're a good bunch of people. When I just moved here and couldn't make heads or tails of everything, they were really kind to me. Rena was really kind and always looked after me. As long as that strange affection didn't rear its ugly head, she was really pretty cute. Mion is also a really good person. She didn't care about anyone's age or gender, and was optimistic and outgoing. I was never bored when I was with her. And talking of not getting bored, rambunctious Sadako was a good person for that too. She was pretty bratty, but that was just the way she interacted with others. Rika-chan was the same way. She didn't speak often, but that didn't mean she was always silent. They're my friends. But after hearing of the better untold secrets of Hinamizawa from Oishi-san and Tometake-san, when I was told about Oyashiro-sama's curse, things started going crazy. Then hearing from Oishi-san that Mion, Rena, Sadako, and Rika-chan were all suspicious. After that, everyone changed. That's right. It all started getting weird after Oishi-san told me all of the strange stuff. At that time, I really should have just not listened to those weird stories. I shouldn't even have asked Tomitake-san about the past incidents on the night of Watanagashi. If I just hadn't gotten that strange sense of curiosity, if I just hadn't. That's right. So that's why they blanked Tomitake-san. Killed, I guess? That impudent outsider speaking to the likes of me after everybody went out of their way to keep it a secret from me. They'll probably blank Oishi-san as well, for trying to unearth what everybody was warning me was better left buried. Besides that, he was unforgivable for spewing words that made me doubt the others. Of course, a guy like that is going to be blanked. Why is it censored out? Both Tomitake-san and Oishi-san were nothing but outsiders after all. They were entities who couldn't coexist with the people of Hinamizawa. Those guys should just fall to Oyashiro-sama's curse and just die? It wasn't their fault. It was my fault for not being able to hold back my curiosity. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't their fault. Oh my god, it wasn't their fault, it wasn't their fault, it wasn't their fault. I settled into a daze. It was a lethargic feeling like I had just gotten up. but the ominous chill that haunted me had subsided. I was fine now. I was no longer frightened. I had completely recovered. I'll go to school tomorrow, right as rain. I'll greet everyone. I'll take part in club activities. It'll definitely be fun. It had to be fun. I was one of them after all.
あ、そうだ。おはぎ食べないと。どれがレナの手作りか当てないといけないんだよな。
I remembered the homework the two brought with them when they visited me. But wow, our club did delivery. That was something else. I picked up the package I dropped on the floor and headed into the living room. It would be nice, I guess, to have some tea with it. It's so weird seeing Keiichi, like, just a few seconds ago he was like in a panic-induced state where he's trying to rationalize everything in his head, and now it's like he completely pushed all of that aside and returned to normal, like in a, I guess, a state of denial, if anything. But it's interesting seeing inside his head in a way that the anime couldn't show. So I'm really liking that. To fill my mouth with mochi while drinking tea. Oh. This was quite a delectable sensation I was in. Opening up the newspaper wrapping, there were 5 plump red bean paste mochi fit snugly inside. There were letters written from left to right on the newspaper, A, B, C, D, and E. Now then. They said Rena made one of these. I wonder which one. There wasn't much difference in how they looked. They smelled and appeared about the same. This was a pretty difficult problem. The biggest difference was probably their shape. I wasn't sure what kind of person Mion's grandmother was, but Rena had to be different from hers. Looking carefully, I could see one mochi that was made very neatly. So, well, that, just by staring at it. So well that, just by staring at it, one could tell it stood out.
この一個がレナのか否かが勝負の分かれ目みたいだな。
Calm down and think even harder. Mion had said her grandma made a ton of them and was told to give some out, if I remembered correctly. So that meant 4 of these were from that large batch. Then what about Rena? She probably only made 1. So she probably spent quite a bit of time on it. Meaning, the one Rena had made was this one, E. For a moment, I thought it may have been a trap Mion laid as she knew I'd pick up on it, but that probably wasn't the case. I wouldn't be so sure if I knew Mion had made it, but since she said Rena made it, it probably wasn't a trap.
よし。お茶も準備 OK。まずはディフェンディングチャンピオンのミオンのばあちゃんからだ。どれ？
Not bad. The smooth bean paste and soft, chewy texture left little to be desired. The tea I drank afterwards also accentuated the experience. This was an exquisite piece of work. Now, how about Rena's? The creation was so delicate, one would think it was a high-class Japanese dessert. Since I normally had quite the appetite, I was slightly worried about the size of the portion. But well, first a bite. This was quite a difficult one to judge, actually. The ingredients were exactly the same, so there was little difference in flavor. What was the difference was how it was shaped at the end, so it was to be expected. So the deciding factors would be presentation and volume. The well-formed and well-sized champion versus Rena, the challenger, with the size you just couldn't get enough of. I'd only had one bite of Rena's. I would probably have to wait until after I was done eating to make my decision. Maybe there was something hidden inside that could cause an upset. It seems my prediction was right. My tongue touched something. It didn't feel like something edible, so I reached in with my fingers and grabbed it. What? What is this? Before I could fully comprehend what it was, I threw away the rest of the mochi I was eating as fast as I could. It slammed against the wall, causing the bean jam to splatter. Then after sticking for a moment, it slid down on the floor. I was dumbstruck by my own actions. What was I doing? Rena had gone out of her way to make it for me. How could I? Dumbstruck, I looked down at the hand that performed such a vile act. Then I remembered what I was taking out of my mouth. At first, I thought it was a hair. Even though it was shorter than Mion's, Rena's hair was still quite long. And it wasn't this short. It was also a bit too hard to be hair. It was thick enough to roll around on my tongue. There was a bit of a metallic sheen on the end of it. Ah yes, there was a hole for where thread goes through, like it was a sewing needle. Yes, that's right. It looked very much like a sewing needle. Exactly like one. The end was pointed as well, quite sharply. It really did look like a sewing needle. Huh? What did I mean by looked very much like a sewing needle just a bit ago? I couldn't answer. But a voice inside me already knew, and let me know by chattering my molars together. I couldn't stave out the terror welling up inside me. Suddenly, I tasted something metallic and felt a prickling pain at the back of my throat. I stuck my finger in the back of my mouth and felt around to see if it was bleeding. Suddenly, I felt the urge to vomit. The sharp taste of bile irritated the back of my throat. I clasped both hands over my mouth, and after writhing in agony, I was somehow able to hold back the nausea. I was finally able to breathe normally again, but this time my heart was throbbing intensely. Then, it finally registered. Exactly what was mixed in with the mochi. Before I could think of the correct word, my hands were already on the move. Splat. Plop. Splort. I tossed the rest of the mochi against the wall. The geometrical patterns of the scattered bean jam on the wall suddenly invoked a terrible omen in my mind. Wow, I like how the splatters were actually visible on the background art. After looking away, I dashed out to the hall and flew upstairs to my room, where I stayed under my covers until morning. I clutched my own shoulders, howling madly with a mix of fear, anger, sadness, and frustration. This wasn't a threat or warning or reminder, nothing as simple as that. What had happened in Hinamizawa? What is happening in Hinamizawa? What would happen? I didn't know the answer to any of those questions. Where did I break a taboo? Regardless, now Regardless, now Rena and Mion and others. They considered me an enemy. And they thought I should just die. I won't let you kill me. Not for such a pointless reason. I fell into a restless sleep as I was crushed by my negative emotions. It was as if I had been drawn into a billowing, bottomless swamp. Wow, okay. Okay, that will about do it. Wow. Alright, so we got a lot of information about Keiichi's group of friends being connected to every victim of the curse. And it looks like not only Rena, but Mion too, is like trying to scare Keiichi into something. And giving him a dessert with a needle in it, that's pretty, yeah, that's terrifying. As an avid sweet tooth owner myself, I shudder at the fact of biting into a dessert only to find something scary or something wrong with it in general, so I take great offense to that. But anyway, yeah, I'm kind of scared for Keiichi right now, but we will see what happens to him later on. Thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next episode. Later.